Thank you to our listeners for being with us today. Jacques, welcome to the show.
Hello, Anne. I am so excited to be here and big fan of the podcast, and it's cool to be on it now.
Well, it's so good to have you. Let's go back to the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like before you started Raindrop?
Yeah. So my raindrop is unique for me in that I started it so young. I was only 25 years old. And I think because of that, it allowed me a very unique path that hopefully someone out there will think is worth listening to and find inspiration from. You know, at the time, I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. Not life like in some sort of like existential way, but I think, I had graduated from college. I had gotten my degree in communications. I generally was drawn to things that involve communicating. I got my first job in news at a local news station. And while I was there, I was only there for a year and a half, and people kept telling me, you might be good at marketing. And I'm like, I don't know anything about marketing. And on top of that, I think the biggest marketing company I'd ever seen was a local guy who made like the local pest control ads with jingles and stuff, which, to me that was the dream. I was like, maybe one day I too can make a famous jingle. Which is funny because now this many years later, almost 14, 15 years later, I still haven't really made a famous jingle. I've made some very famous commercials and campaigns, but not a famous jingle. But I will say that it was an interesting moment in time because I was literally interviewing people saying like, how did you know what you wanted to do? And it's very frustrating when you're young because if some people have the fortune of just like my brother knew he wanted to be a physician when he was in middle school or early high school. For me, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I remember thinking, well, it'd be really cool to be a newscaster, but I didn't really know what that meant and what that looked like. And then I started getting under the hood of that, and I was like, I don't think I want to do this, which was a weird place to get because it's kind of a dream that you thought you might have, and then you get there and you're like, this isn't my dream. It's a dream, but it's not my dream. And I think that it was interesting talking to people, and they would say things like, follow your dreams, follow your passions. And what I realized all these years later, and the advice I gave it to somebody yesterday, even a young member of our team, was I said, follow your curiosity because it's how you'll find your dreams. If you follow your curiosities, you'll find your passions. If you find your passions, you'll find your dreams. And so that's what I did. I followed my curiosities. I started making videos and simple WordPress websites for like local trainers and for someone who's a massage therapist, like not even for the gym or for the spa, for like an individual person, like let me just help who I can with their needs. And that has grown into what we are today. And, done a couple Super Bowl campaigns. We've done over $1 billion in sales and have almost 100 team members here.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's been crazy, but it started with just the hope of helping people. Like I was like, I think I can help people. I'm savvy enough. My youth is a positive thing. I know a little bit about social media. I know a little bit about websites. I know a little bit about making videos, taking photos. And so that would be the answer to your question of like, where did this start all the way back when and how it came to be.
That's a pretty big step going from making individual people's websites to now running a 100-person company and having your own studio. Like, what were some of those key steps in the middle there?
Yeah. I will say, I think the three things that happened that were all important is one, I found some early mentors that were really great. And their advice, I mean, some of the wisdom that they shared still just rings in my head today. I have one mentor who he grew a business to $250 million from, he was like a family friend. And the two pieces of advice that he gave me that I've never forgotten was he said, if you have your name in the name of your company, people will always expect you there. And so I actually changed the name of my business from Jacques Productions to Raindrop because of that. And then the other thing he's always said, and he still says to me today when I see him, is, Jacques, you raise your prices yet? And part of that is he was one of my first clients as a family friend. And I remember he wanted this, like, it was like a like a 2 day shoot, multiple things. I charged him like $800, something like that, you know. And he was like, I think he was like, dude, if you're not charging enough, like, you're not gonna make it. You're not gonna make it at $800 shoots for the amount of work that we're asking you to do. So that was an early mentor. I had another mentor who had, I think, 3 or 4 employees at the time. So he helped me with things like when I had my first hire and healthcare. And then I've also been really fortunate about 3, 4 years into my journey. I met my business partner. I knew him from college, but he had gone on to work at some larger agencies and he's 2 years younger than me. And so I must have been, I want to say 26 and he was 24 at the time. So we were still so young. Yeah, but he had like 2 years of experience at bigger agencies. And so he was the yin to my yang. We became business partners. And so, like, his ability to understand a lot of the operational elements, my creativity and business sense and networking, like, all of it came together really nicely. And I had another person who they were actually one of my first clients. I wouldn't call them a mentor per se, but they had a couple partners. And this is right around the time I was thinking about bringing on a partner, and they had a successful business. And I remember asking, I was like, like, how would you handle this? Like, I'm thinking about bringing this guy on as a partner, but I've been doing this a couple of years. And he said to me, he said, if this is the right person, you'll never regret being too generous to them. And I'm like, ooh, like, that's okay. That's really good advice, because I think a lot of times partnership is much like, I mean, honestly, I have my marriage and I have my business partnership, and they're both incredibly intimate, because it's like in both of them, we're dealing with finances. And in both of them, on one side, I have my wife and I have my son, and we make decisions for our family and our son, and others, like, I'm making decisions that will impact people's families and their kids and their family. So it's like, it's really nice to have someone that is in it with me and aligned with, like, we have aligned values in terms of how we treat people and what we want for the future. And of course, I think business partnerships can go exceptionally wrong, especially when you're young and naive. So I think people get mixed direction on that. Sometimes they hear, never, be careful of business partnerships. I'm like, yeah, that's like going through a divorce and saying, be careful of marriages. It's like, yeah, I mean, it could be the best thing you do or the worst thing you do, if you make the wrong decisions. But you kind of have to take that risk if you want something great. And so my business partner, Adam, has been like, without him, it would not be a 100-person company, 100%.
Well, that
Yeah.
sounds like the perfect partnership then. So going back just
Yeah.
a little bit, you mentioned these mentors though. How did you find these mentors? Were these personal connections through your family? Were you in a group? Did you seek them out? Like, how did you find these
Hmm.
people?
So, like I said, the one was a family friend. And what's interesting is he doesn't know anything about marketing. He just knows about business, right? He doesn't know anything about marketing. He doesn't know anything about what I was doing. He was just like giving me good general business advice. And I think that's something important to be aware of when you are doing something, is there are people who can give you really great business advice, but maybe they don't really understand exactly what you do. Maybe they understand the product industry, but they don't understand the service industry, or they understand the real estate industry, but they don't really understand, you know what I mean? It's like, you got to be careful about who you're taking advice from. That's just a reality. But I respected him and it's weird too when people are already at like a place where they're so successful and they have a hard time speaking to, like, oh, but I'm just me, I am the company, I don't have employees, like, so he was great, but it wasn't, he couldn't rely on him for the tangible things. And so I just found someone that was like a couple steps ahead of me. His name was David Oates, and like to this day I'm just so grateful for him because he was just very generous with me. He would meet with me for coffee. There's nothing in it for him. He just was like, I want to help you. And I've had some people like that. I have probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 people that will text me out of the blue, hey, I'm running into this thing. I'm trying to figure out a contract with this. What would you do? How would you charge for this? Do you have a template that I can use for a contract? That kind of thing, is definitely a big part of the reality. But that's how I found. I just was looking for someone. And then I think people, you kind of have to ask directly. I think sometimes people are afraid to just say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. I really admire what you're doing. Would you be willing to meet with me like once every 2 months for 30 minutes, an hour, so I can bounce ideas off of you? And there's so many people out there that'd be like, of course, I'd love to. So yeah, so that's how I found people.
Amazing, and I love it when people who are that successful are so accessible too.
Mhm.
It's just a really kind way to spread your knowledge. So shifting a little bit into the creative process, can you describe your brainstorming process after signing a new client?
Sure. So obviously, when you sign a client, it's like you want to get onboarded with their vision and where they're wanting to go. But in this, it takes a little bit of like almost mental jujitsu, if you will, because I think ultimately people want to grow their businesses. Uh, and I think sometimes people think they know how to do that, and they do. And sometimes they think they know how to do that, and they don't. I think the best partners are the ones who are open to saying, "Hey, I know what I know. I'll tell you what I know. I'd love your input on where this could go or be." And what we tend to do, and what I preach is, when we bring in a client, we start to look at. Have you ever heard of the saying, "People don't buy your what, they buy your why"? Is that something you've heard of?
Yes.
Okay, so what we started realizing, and what's been the breakthrough for our work, is we started realizing that, as a brand or as a service provider, like, people don't buy your why as the brand or the service provider, they buy their own why. And so a lot of times they want to tell you like why they're great and why they exist and why they started their company. And it's like, okay, yeah, but why, what are people's whys, because everything that we buy, everything we do, says something about who we are and who we're hoping to become, in aspirationally, or it's just a reflection of like, I'm this kind of person, I'm the kind of person who would eat this brand of beef jerky versus this brand, I'm the kind of person who would drive this car versus that car, or go to this place to get my massage versus that place because I'm this. And so what we ask ourselves in this process is like, by engaging with this, whatever that brand is, what is someone saying about themselves? And we start pulling at that. No matter what we're doing, it doesn't matter if we're doing photography, video campaign, a social media account. We start with that fundamental question of like, if someone's wearing your logo on their shirt, what are they saying about who they are, what they value, what they're hoping to accomplish or be in life, or what problems are they trying to solve for themselves. And so that's how we start the process. So it does start pretty heavy strategy oriented, which I think we used to do more ad hoc. It was just sort of like our instincts, like, okay, why would someone care enough about your brand to actually buy it, or why would someone care enough about your service to pick you over someone else? But then as we've gotten more mature with our company, we've realized like, no, that's the first step, is like defining some of those things so that you can come up with better ideas. That is our process for, like, we bring someone on, we ask them, yes, of course, their story, of course, their target audiences, but we start asking ourselves these deeper questions of like, what is the why of the actual person that's going to buy this?
That is so interesting. And as you were saying it, I was just thinking about that because you're right. We don't often think about our
Mm-hmm.
consumers why. Are you all just sitting around a boardroom table then and just sort of interjecting, well, the person will be like this or they're like that, these are their values? Like, who is the one that is analyzing the mental jujitsu of the consumer?
We have we have people that are on our team that are literal strategists, in our creative strategists, our creative team. And I will say it's interesting. Okay, let me give you an analogy, and then I'll give you an example. So the analogy is, you know, there was a point in time where we figured out that the world was actually round. Like, there was that moment, that like eureka moment. It was a big deal, right? I was like, whoa, like we can sail around the world and like we won't fall off the edge of it. And it was exciting. But even once we had that discovery, we still believed that the earth was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around us. The earth, or the sun, the moons, the planets, like we were the center of the universe and everything revolves around us. And it's like, it's kind of humbling to realize that, like, no, we're a planet that revolves around the sun, and we're one sun in the universe. And I'm like, in this case, the consumer is the sun. We revolve around them with our products, our brands, like anything we do is like they have their own center of gravity. We revolve around them. most brands haven't ever thought of it that way. They're just like, we're great and you should buy us because we're great. And let me tell you why we're like, they'll literally say we instead of you, like to start an ad. Instead of saying, have you ever wondered? They'll say, we're like, hey, we're this and we exist because of this. And it's like, what, you're at the center of someone's universe? Like, you know what I mean? Like we revolve around them. So, and so the example I would give is, well, again, we ask ourselves, why would someone be listening to this podcast right now? Right? I mean, as an exercise. And so then when you start pulling in that thread, it starts to get really interesting. You're like, okay, well, why are they listening to this? Well, they're clearly someone who believes that if they listen to people who have done it, whatever it is, they've chased some version of a dream, they've they've been able to monetize it and make a living from their passions. By listening to their stories, you might just find something that sparks or inspires your path, right? That and it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It could just be this one little takeaway, but you're not going to find I always tell my son, you're more likely to find something that you're looking for. It's like people that are listening to this podcast right now are more likely to find what they're looking for because they're listening to this podcast, right? They are they are
Right.
not in the passenger seat of life, they're in the driver's seat of their life. I mean, you could be doing nothing right now. You could be scrolling TikTok, but you're listening to this podcast. So I already know you're in the driver's seat of your life. Like you're somebody who you're willing to take the wheel, you're willing to make changes, you're willing to hear from others, you're hungry and eager to like stay curious. So when you start pulling at the threads of that, you start realizing, oh, okay, that's why someone's listening to this. And so it helps to understand as a brand, okay, well then not only do so let me give you an example here. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, Ann, but it's like what's crazy about this is that you're already doing the hard work as a brand. Like someone's already come, but when you're able to turn the mirror back on them and give them those affirmations as to why they've chosen these things, it's so powerful because not only does it endear them more to what you're doing, but then it gives them the words to explain to other people why they do it. Right. And so you turn everyone into a word of mouth machine that understands the talking points. Right. And it's like, and so that's what we're trying to do with all of our advertising. It's just, okay, how do we create that loop so that people see themselves in what we're doing? We mirror back to them, this is who you are, is what you believe, is why this is a great decision, why you're great. And then they go and they tell their friends, hey, I listen to this podcast, honestly, like it's something that I do while I walk on the treadmill or go for my walk, and it's my way of like really inspiring myself to keep myself accountable for like where I'm at in my life journey. Like I know, like even if I haven't come up with my big idea yet, I know that I'm likely to find it if I keep digging. Like you give people the words to describe why they're interacting with your brand, and if it connects, it can be magic, and that's what we do. That's how we help people.
This is like blowing my mind the way that you think because it's so new to me. And I've never spoken to anybody who understands it on the level that you do. So I'm really appreciating everything that you're saying. So, with that in mind, what have been some of your most successful campaigns that you've run? And in retrospect, when analyzing the campaign, what do you think were the ingredients that gave you that winning
Yeah.
formula?
Well, first of all, that was super sweet of you to say. I mean, I appreciate you even asking these questions, right? These are really great questions, and I feel very fortunate to be able to share, what we're learning along the way. It's like we're most known for a couple, like being behind a couple brands, and I would say, you know, really where we got our big break and our big opportunity was with Dr. Squatch. It's a men's soap company. They were about 6 years ish into their business. They were doing just under $3 million a year in sales. And so when they came to us, I remember the conversation. I remember exactly a couple of things that were really interesting. One was the founder had a really deep purpose and story behind why he had created the product, which was he dealt with psoriasis, he had skin issues, and these other products were irritating to his skin. He started making it on his own. It developed a small niche community of people that like really liked it, but it was like frankly, the business was like, it wasn't quite, it was growing, but it's growing so slowly that like it wasn't even fun anymore. It was like, man, I'm 6 years into this, and like, oh, like this is tough, right? And we had a couple ahas. One of them was literally sitting in the boardroom, and we're like, why would someone buy why would they spend $9 on a single bar of soap when they can buy a 30 pack from Costco for like 17.99, right? Like, if we're selling soap and soap alone, we are dead in the water. We can't just sell soap. If we're just selling soap, we are screwed. It's like, you know what I mean? It's just like, well, that's not a real good value proposition. And where we landed after going through this branding exercise was that, the brand wants to make men feel like kings in their own shower. That was sort of the like posturing of it. And it was really interesting because we realized that even though it seemed like a product that would typically be purchased by men that were like, fashionable and living in Portland, Oregon or something, we actually saw from the credit card data, it was like blue collar workers that some people were waiting for their paycheck to come just to buy the soap. Like they were like, really, this was their, attainable luxury purchase for themselves. And we pulled at that and we created, content around this that really took off for them, and they went from 3 million to 10 million, 10 million to 50 million, 50 to 100 million, 100 million, and then on and on and on. And that's where we created ads for, helping them launch Star Wars and Marvel and working with NFL players in the Super Bowl. That trajectory was wild because you just saw how not only can you change, buying behavior, but you can change culture. You can get people exposed to and excited about an all natural product that they would have never been in the market for. And ultimately, what we found was that we were selling joy, and it happened to come in the form of soap. It's like Dove doesn't, necessarily give you joy in the shower. It's a great product, right? Like, I've used Dove plenty of times in my life, right? Like, it's just like being really clear about like what your consumer's why is in that purchase, super important. And so we ultimately found that like people are proud to display these soaps, and they would be happy from the moment it arrived in the mail, the way it smelled. And so we just continue to make advertising that would tap into some of those like insights to help grow that brand. And then we've been working with Native. It's another all natural like line of body care for the last 3 years, and they've really really been successful. We've leaned into this fun like centaur character and Aphrodite character, and it's really been more around dispelling some of the fears and anxieties and myths around all natural products, getting people excited to try them. And they do a really great job with their R&D and their scents. Anyway, bottom line is what we're noticing more and more is that we connect people's whys to advertising that people actually want to consume. Like when they get an ad from Native or from Dr. Squatch, we want them to go, oh, like I can't wait to see this. What is it? What is it going to be next? When you create advertising that way, people consume the product, they consume the brand, and they become, super fans, and they spread the news and the word. And they even what's crazy to me is that these things have become like Christmas and holiday products, meaning like people buy them as gifts. Like that's kind of crazy to think about with body care. It's like that's not when's the last time that people would gift each other in a stocking these products. So we've had a lot of fun with those. We got lots of things that we're up to, but those are the two things that I think people probably have seen the most and obviously seen a lot of growth from.
So fun. And I've personally seen that Centaur ad for Native,
Wonderful.
and it did make me stop scrolling. I
There we go.
literally watched the whole thing, and I usually just, scan straight through, and I don't. So speaking a little bit to that, how are you creating these scroll stopping social video ads? Like, what are the secrets, and how do you keep the content so engaging in
Hmm.
comparison to everything else that's out there?
Man, and you're asking the best questions. Okay, so it goes back to a question that you asked earlier, but then I'll jump off from there, which is I think so. I want to give you an example of how a company might usually think versus how we're going to handle how we approach it. usually a company will put together a brief and they'll say, here's our objective, here's the things we want to talk about, here's the places that this campaign will go, right? And so all we've really said is, I want to talk about me. Here's the things I want to say about me. Here's what I hope people learn about me. That's all. I mean, that's literally all we said with a brief. And it's kind of crazy when you think about like that's how most of us approach advertising is like, what do I want to say? Where am I going to say it? And so what we're reversing out in the way that we approach things is we say, what do people want to hear about themselves by purchasing this? And then how are we going to earn their attention to tell them this story? And so in many cases for us, like in something like what you're seeing there with whether it's the Centaur campaign or anything else, our team of like copywriters and art directors are spending probably collectively somewhere between on the low end 40 hours, on the high end 100 hours worth of time creating what is this universal truth we're tapping into? What's this world that we're building? What is our reason to literally stop your scroll before we've written a single word? There is no script. There's no, like, we call it concepting. There's no script yet. There's not like, hey, this is how we're going to say it. Because before we figure out what we're going to say, we need to figure out how are we even going to matter and get attention? Because if we don't matter and get attention, what we have to say doesn't matter. Unless you have 50 to $100 million to force it down people's throats. Like, it's like if you want that outsized return, you want people to remember it quicker, buy it faster. You have to approach it from that standpoint of how are we going to your point, stop the scroll, or even if you get a television ad, how are we going to make it so that we live rent free in your head longer? We start with that fundamental question before we write anything. Then we actually write the scripts probably about 5 to 6 weeks into the process. We've already set up our strategy. We've already done our concepting. Now we're going to get into, okay, great. Now here's what we're actually going to talk about. Now that we've established, like, how are we even going to come into whether it's your living room, into your phone in a way that you're actually going to pay attention to? Because if you're not going to pay attention, then what are we all doing? Right? We're wasting time. We're wasting money. So that's how you arrive at what feels like a crazy swing in something like a Centaur. But I would just argue that the alternative is an ad that takes place in a bathroom with someone going swish swish and it's saying 72-hour coverage, and you've forgotten about it like literally the second the next ad comes on. And so it's boring. It doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work. And so that's what we tend to do. That's where we found our success for sure.
And then when the writing team gets involved, like what is that process like? You hand them all of the strategic work that you've been
Yeah.
developing, and then they start working on a script?
They're part of the concepting too. Yeah. So they're definitely, after we have some strategic setup work, which again, a variety, like the strategic setup is more robust as budgets get bigger and everything else, right? Like I'm not going to lie there, where it's like, okay, well, sometimes we have 5 to 10 hours for strategy and sometimes we have 100 hours for strategy. It really depends on the campaign. But the bottom line is that we're still going to go through the same process for anybody. It's just how much time and attention can we dedicate to it, because you want everything you do to be successful. And that's why you have a certain, like, we turn away a lot of potential clients that are like bummed that they can't work with us, but I'm like, I just, to do what we do well and what you expect, there's no cheap and simple way to do that. It's just, you're going to get something that's half baked that again won't be good. So our copywriting team is very much part of it. They're the ones that are helping come up with the concepts that jump off of what we're trying to communicate. So they're really helping to pitch that in. We also have our art directors that are now in those meetings. We have even our production team is in those meetings. So we are really oddly, and I think in a cool way, integrated that, from the beginning, we have a lot of creative minds in that process being like, ooh, what if the lead person was a miniature angel instead of just a regular person? It's like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. How would we pull that off? Well, we need to do this. And not just for the sake of being weird, but also just if it has some sort of strategic connection to what we're trying to convey. We have a project we're working on right now for somebody where literally we're shrinking somebody, and I was downstairs earlier today. We're shooting it next week, and they were testing, what it's going to look like and be like, which I, bless their hearts, because we don't want to like shoot it and then realize it's going to be too hard. But they're down there right now working on it, again, with the focus of, yes, we're going to convey a lot of cool messaging, but it needs to be wrapped in a way that I can't stop watching. I need to know where this thing's headed and how in the world are these people doing this crazy fun ad that I want to learn more about. So that's where we start before we start writing things. And then we also, of course, write the scripts. You have to write the scripts. I'm not trying to make the script writing sound not important. I'm just saying most people go brief script. And then they try to back into like, well, this is why it's strategic, and this is why people will care, and this is why it's going to sell. And honestly, that's what we did too, like the first 7 years of our existence. So that's not, a knock on anything or anyone. That's just what we've discovered to be more successful.
And so you just mentioned before that you went downstairs to go and look at this shoot that they're working on.
Yeah,
So you have a whole in-house
we do.
studio
Yeah,
at your
yeah.
okay. When did that come into the picture? When did you start shooting everything in your studio? And when did you acquire a studio space large enough to do it all?
Yeah. So after COVID, we continued to grow. We went from one production team to two production teams to three production teams, fully in house. And I think the reason that we have a part of it was that we had so many shoots that we were renting so many studios that it actually became a logistical issue, because I was like, okay, well, if their studio wasn't available the week we needed it, then what, right? Now we're going where? We're going to LA. Like, how are we going to handle this? So there was just a logistical reason of like, oh, we need our own studio space. So we built out our own studios. I think it was like fall of 2021, and it just allowed us to be much more agile to get higher. Because what's interesting is, because we have element, it's like we can get a look that would, if someone wanted to build it from scratch, for example, we can get a look that would cost someone like $30,000 to build from scratch. We can modify what we have to do it for $5,000, right? Like, it's hard to explain, but in having and owning your own set builds and your own processes, you can just do things that you just can't do otherwise. I don't know how to explain it, but it has this constant return where a lot of times we'll invest in a set more heavily than we typically would for a specific client, but we also know that, like, oh, if we ever shoot something in the outdoors again and we need a forest, we now know how we have all the moving pieces to build a forest, right? And we can augment it. We have two full studio spaces, actually three studio spaces. One is primarily more of like a kitchen set, and we do a lot of photography there. And then the other two are just full studio spaces. We used to have like a main office, but we ended up, after the COVID, just shutting it down because people weren't coming in, and so much of what we can do either needs to take place in a studio, or people are fine being on a laptop in front of Zoom. So that's where the split happened. And I like to come into the studio. One, just I enjoy being around and seeing the creative work, but it's also just I like being in the zone and being outside of my home. But a lot of people like working from home, and I respect that too.
And at what point should brands invest in producing this high quality production value content? So, like with actors and directors and these bigger concepts.
It's a good question. I think, well, because there's so many different ways to build a brand, right? Like, we have some brands that approach us who have raised money and they haven't even launched yet, and they want to like do it right from the start. And I respect the heck out of that. Like, that is, like, for people that can do that, great, right? Like, not everyone's in a position to do that. That's a great way to start if you can, right? So, that is a reality. That's one way to start. The other way to start is, people will go and maybe they'll white label a product, which means they find someone to manufacture it, but they're able to like put their own brand sticker on it, right? And then they can pop up maybe a Shopify shop, or get an Amazon going, right? And like actually start getting it out there and selling it. If it's more of that like slower bootstrapped space, we tend to see people start to invest in higher level creative sometime after about like a we'll say like a $2 million to $3 million run rate. And even if that's not investing with us, like we have partners that we refer a lot of people to because we're like, hey, they're not ready for us, but you do need support and you do need something higher quality. I think that's really where when you start getting into you have enough product market fit, meaning you are selling a product, you're getting new customers, like you have momentum there. But then you also need to start differentiating your actual brand enough to say, hey, like when you talk about higher quality stuff, to me that's you don't want to just sell the solution, you want to sell your brand. I can't tell you how many times I've been on TikTok lately for TikTok shops and I'll get an ad for a solution, meaning okay, well, this is a flavored type of sunflower seed, or this is a hat that you could buy, whatever it is. And I'm like, oh, okay, like that's available. But then it's like you could go through TikTok shop and you don't know really where it comes from and what's going to happen. Or you pop over to Amazon and you plug it in. You're like, nah, it's this exact same thing. It's just on Amazon. It's a little bit more expensive, but I trust Amazon. Boom, I'm gonna buy it from Amazon. And so I think when you start investing in higher quality creative, it is also a little bit of like, I want to make sure that people want my brand, not just the solution I'm selling. And I think a lot of times brands miss that because they'll be advertising, but it's for a solution, not their actual brand. And if I convince you, like, oh man, you really need to use an all natural toothpaste. Well, there's a lot of all natural toothpaste. So if I go to Amazon and type in natural toothpaste, well, all I've done is convince you to buy the category, not buy my brand. So that's where I say, hey, you shouldn't be investing in growing your brand because as it grows, people need. And I also say higher quality video and photo does convey trust. People trust that if someone's investing in their photography and video, that they're also legitimate and they're not just fly by night drop ship scammy type of stuff. I mean, we've all had the experience, I think, at this point of buying something online that was like way lower quality than we thought, oddly itchy fabric, whatever. Like, you know what I'm talking about. And
Yeah.
so I think having some of that helps people feel much more confident about buying online.
And so you were mentioning TikTok and social media and speaking about trust. How can brands best leverage user generated content to tell their story while also making sure they maintain quality?
Totally. So every brand, pretty much every brand, unless you're a luxury brand, every brand utilizes UGC, right? I think the reality of UGC is you have to ask yourself on like a primal level, like why does UGC even work? And I think ultimately there's two reasons. I think one is people, they can see and they can hear, but they can't smell, they can't taste, and they can't touch. And so I think UGC is a good starting place for testing how to leverage those other senses in ways that will matter to people. And it's also a really good way to connect with people on social validation around, oh, I see this ad and this ad and this ad. It's different people talking about it. I think as human beings, we look to others for social validation. What are other people doing? What are they trying? What's normal? I think about that Armstra colostrum or something like that. I'm getting so many ads for it. It's like, oh my gosh. And it's like, it went from feeling like, oh, they're pushing this really strange new supplement that I've never heard of to like, oh, it seems like everyone must be buying it because they can clearly spend a lot on advertising. And wow, like I've now seen now I'm actively not buying it because I'm like, meaning I can feel myself going, oh, I've chosen not, instead of saying I've chosen to potentially buy. I'm like, I've chosen now not to buy because I've seen it so many times. Not saying I don't want to try it. I'm just saying I can feel myself as a consumer saying, "Oh, I'm very aware that this exists and that people are trying it." And so I think UGC gives you that opportunity to build momentum and testimonial and velocity of just like being able to make so many ads. AG1 did a great job with it too, and so many others do as well. I mean, UGC isn't news or new to anyone, but it's certainly proliferated quite a bit.
And you don't think it's going anywhere? You think UGC is here to stay?
I think some version of it is. I honestly don't know how these platforms are going to handle AI content, but my true gut tells me that And it's not because of the sake of advertising. I think in general, they're going to need to start to delineate between authenticated content and AI generated content, much like they already will. If you see on X or something and someone posts like an incorrect fact and then they'll like fact check it right below, or the way that they're trying to force people that are running ads from their influencer account to say hashtag ad. And I think there's even FTC guidelines around that. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's moving in a direction where I think that if it is AI generated, it will come with a warning label of sorts. And what that will create in my mind is a circumstance where some brands won't care and they'll still do it, and they'll be just like any industry has what we call like black hat strategy. So they'll be like, yeah, I don't care, I'll make an ad with someone else's, like I'll take a famous person, I'll use their voice and their likeness and I'll just run it, and if I get slapped on the wrist or shut down, oh well. But I think what it'll do for like established brands is they won't want to have the good standing of their account be blemished, and they will probably steer away from it, would be my guess. It's like you do not want to get your Meta account shut down or your YouTube account shut down or your CTV account shut down if you're a brand that's like relying on it for advertising. I generally think that's probably the direction it'll go, where I think UGC is not going anywhere. I think AI generated UGC will run into some natural challenges with people being like, I don't know about that.
Well, so knowing when you go into a campaign and you don't know how the campaign is going to perform, how do you approach pricing?
This is a good question. So, oh man, there's a whole mathematical equation to all of this where you know I will tell you that I am not a believer in the pay on performance model for so many reasons, but ultimately I think it's, even though it sounds like on the surface that the brand interests and the interests of the person making the creative are aligned, the problem with it is that as a brand, you want your creative actually to be a more fixed cost, because that's where you can get bigger and bigger wins. When your bigger and bigger wins cost you more and more, it actually de-incentivizes that campaign to continue to grow. Like if we were, let me give you an example. If we were in a pay on performance model with Dr. Squatch, when they launched their ad, they probably would be a third of the size that they are right now. And yes, I would have made a lot of money, but like it wouldn't be good for them. Like it would have dragged down the entire system of being able to scale that, especially as your math just gets closer and closer to being profitable. And it's like that 1, 2, 3%, 4%, 5% is the difference maker. I think a lot of brands engage with creative people in that from the sense of like, well, it also covers my downside. Like if it doesn't work, then I'll have to pay. And so I totally get that as well. And so it's actually something I remind our team of quite a bit too. It's like, reality is we have brands that we have invested in, 100%. Like we definitely have brands that we've done a mix of, okay, they've paid us cash, but we've also done some equity, and those have been great. And I love them. Like they're great opportunities, right? But I think a lot of brands, when they come to you and they're looking for this level of production, and they're not interested in a partner. They're like, I need someone to make me a campaign, right? I mean, they're already at $400 million in sales, $300 million in sales, $100 million, $50 million in sales. They don't want a partner. They don't want a unfixed cost. What they need is they need the predictability that what they pay you to do is going to cost what you say it's going to cost, and it's going to show up on time. And so for us, it's like we are more expensive because we are pricing in the fact, not only the success that we've had, but how much we've learned about what doesn't work. We carry that forward and can teach brands so much just in partnering with us. The reality is that we have the highest home run percentage of anyone in our league. We have more doubles than anyone else too. We probably have the least amount of strikeouts, but like not everything's always going to work. And there's so many reasons why it could potentially not work, right? And there's so many reasons why it does work. And so what we try to do on the front end is ask all the right questions. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, for every 400 inquiries we get, we sign 2 clients,
Whoa.
right? It's like 0.5%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're asking a lot of questions on the front end to ensure that we believe we can be successful with someone. And we could probably, I mean, we could take on more clients if we were more comfortable with potentially failing more people. But that's just not something I've been comfortable with as a business owner, and not really the ethos we have. So we're really trying to say, can we be successful with you? Not just, do you have enough to pay us to make an ad? It's like, do we actually think it'll do what we think it can? And I will reverse that out. Say some of our biggest clients are big retail groups or retailers, and like their goals may be different. Like they're like, well, we're trying to grow market share by 1% this year, 2%, 3%. It's not necessarily all direct to consumer. So when you say like advertising working is, it really depends on what that client is and what they're going for.
What have you learned from some other campaigns, whether they're yours or somebody else's, that maybe don't perform well? Like, what can you say with certainty doesn't work?
Yeah, I would say people overestimate how much the mission of the company matters. Meaning, if you're like, hey, people are going to buy this because we're carbon neutral or because we're this or because we're that, doesn't work. Never works. And I think it goes back to that aha around like people don't buy your why, they buy their own why. Now, I'm not saying it's not part of your story or doesn't matter, but ultimately it's a distraction from the reason they're ultimately going to be buying it, right? If you're a soap company that happens to have maybe a mission of like, you give back a bar of soap for every bar of soap purchased, if you make that the driving force of your ad, you're not actually going to sell much soap. Like people want to know they're going to have a great experience and also by the byproduct feel good about that. But it can be, it's like it never works when you like, unless that mission is so tightly wound to like people's why in the first place, it doesn't work. I've always said I think Tom's put everything in the wrong direction because they had this cool mission, but ultimately, like, cool people started wearing the shoes and it became fashionable. And so people got confused because they were like, oh, people are buying Toms because they have this great model of giving back. And I'm like, no, people bought these expensive shoes because they thought they looked cool in them. Like, that's why. And they happen to also then tell themselves it's okay because they've gifted a pair of shoes to someone in need. So that's what we see a lot of. That's just one example of like, I mean, so many brands that like once they start realizing that that's a cool part of their story, but not the reason that someone's buying, it can change their business quite a bit.
Gosh, I feel like hearing you speak, I really think that you could teach a college level course.
I appreciate that.
I really do.
Thank you.
So, if somebody, let's say a nephew or a niece, or somebody that's just really close to you who's a kid, came up to you, or maybe they're not even a kid, they could be in their 20s, and they just said, I think I want to start my own business. What advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs
Hmm.
in general?
I would say follow your curiosities. They'll lead to your passions. Your passions can lead to your dreams. I think that that's something that I've become very aware of, you know, the reality is that I love what I do. I still love what I do. And that is incredibly important because I like, for example, it's not normal, but like this weekend I'm gonna be working. Like I got some big stuff on the horizon that we're working on, and I'm like, I'm gonna be working this weekend, and I'm okay with that because it's not just work. It's something I'm really enjoying. It's something I'm building into.
You love it.
Yeah. I'd say the other thing, I would say to somebody is to ask themselves like why do they want to start their own thing. I think for me it was like I honestly believed is how I could help people, and that served me well. I think where people get in trouble maybe sometimes is they're like, I don't want a boss. And it's like, truth is, like, if you grow something, you have all your clients who are like mini bosses, and then you have all your employees who are like little mini bosses, and like you serve them all. And so I always laugh when someone's like, "Oh, did you want to be your own boss?" I'm like, "Not really." I'm like, now I just feel responsible for way more people and way more things. But I would just say that, just really tapping into like, why do I want to start this business? For a lot of people, it is also financially driven. Like, I want that upside of like owning it, and I love that. And I totally agree that like the flexibility of time and the ability to grow your finances are both hugely cool opportunities, and they are things that like you only live once. It is cool to go and do it, whether you succeed or fail. Just the fact that you tried is great, right?
So, this might be it. And if this is it, you kind of want to
Oh,
do everything you want to do.
I'm gonna be the first one to have a vending machine empire in heaven. So um
Jacques, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was so fun to have you here.
And this was great. You were phenomenal at interviewing, and I hope everyone subscribes after this.
All right, well, have a good day. I'll see you.
Thanks, Anne.
Bye.
All right, bye.